We've got breaking news out of Sweden where a deadly attack in the nation's capital could have been really much worse. Local media reports a bomb was found in the truck used in yesterday's attack, but it did not properly detonate. CNN international correspondent Max Foster joins us live from Stockholm. What's the latest on this new element of explosives in that truck?
Yeah, that goes to state media and police sources speaking to them, but I've just been speaking to the foreign minister and she didn't deny that. She's leaving it to the police to follow that investigation, but she certainly left it there as a possibility. And if that is the case, it does ramp up this type of attack that we've seen across Europe. So we had an attack in Nice, in Berlin, in London, where a vehicle was used to drive into a crowd and massacre people. And that's what happened here, but it also included explosives, if we're led to believe that that is true. If you look down the street, you've got to imagine the truck was this area.
All right, I think we lost Max Foster's shot there. We got him back. Let's go back to Max. All right, we lost him again. We'll try to get back to him later in the hour. Brianna, let's send it to you in Washington.
All right, well, the president is being praised for this strike on Syria by many of his critics. That includes John McCain and Lindsey Graham. Take a look.
I want to applaud the president for taking action. It was justified, it was necessary, and I hope it sends the right message, not only to Assad, but other people throughout the world. But if it's got to be more than last night. It's got to be a step in what's going to be a fairly long journey.
But he has also seen the reverse, some criticism from some previously strong supporters. Ann Coulter tweeting, Trump campaigned on not getting involved in Mideast, said it always helps our enemies and creates more refugees. Then he saw a picture on TV. Those who wanted us meddling in the Middle East voted for other candidates. Joining me now to talk about these shifts, Sarah Westwood. She's the White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. We also have Josh Rogin, CNN political analyst and columnist for the Washington Post. Okay, Sarah, it is startling when you look at Donald Trump's position, not just as a candidate, but for years, going back to a somewhat similar conundrum that President Obama had to figure out. How did he make good on his threat, or in the end not, that being a red line and attacking Syria for using chemical weapons? So where does he go from here to appease some of those voices, like the Ann Coulters, who took him at his word that he was against intervention?
That's the million-dollar question, because he was such a non-interventionist as a candidate. He criticized basically every element of the Obama administration's foreign policy, and now he's really at a crossroads with Syria. Does he get more involved militarily, diplomatically, or is this just a one-off attack that hopefully staves off further U.S. involvement in the Syrian conflict? But for President Trump, this missile strike and maybe the joint address to Congress in February are the only two times in his presidency that he's received bipartisan praise. So for now, I think the administration is riding on a high, soaking in all of these accolades, and they are going to have to, though, come down from that and figure out what they're going to do in Syria, because it's sort of untenable to leave this missile strike as the only indication of the U.S.'s approach to Syria moving forward.
So, Josh, he's getting this support. We just heard Sarah outlining that, but he's getting disapproval from Ann Coulter and others. What do the quote-unquote real people, the supporters who voted him into office, what do they think? Are they sort of following suit here, do you think?
No, he burned all of his supporters in a spectacular fashion in an effort to sort of, be the anti-Obama. And it's kind of crazy. He can't really repair that. So now he has to sort of lean on his newfound support from the people who opposed him for the last year and a half. And that support is dependent on him doing not just this, but a lot more to even more heavily involve the United States in Syria, which is not clear that he wants to do. So he could end up with the worst of both worlds, being called a hypocrite by people who voted for him and being called not enough of an interventionist by his new friends. So, right now it seems like he's getting a lot of praise. We'll see what happens in a couple of days when Assad perpetrates another attack or the Russians escalate on the ground. Is Donald Trump really going to continue to escalate the U.S. involvement in Syria? I don't think he knows yet. If he does, he's going to burn his supporters even more. And if he doesn't, he's going to lose the praise of his new friends. He's really put himself in a tough spot.
Do you think some of his supporters think, hey, this is a show of strength, this is actually a good thing, the U.S. flexing its muscle? Or is the issue that even if some of them think that, Josh, he stands to lose some of his supporters, and he already had a pretty small slice of the pie when you're looking at the electorate?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the people who are really advocating for U.S. Intervention in Syria, flexing your muscle is not a policy, okay? All it does is get him involved, okay? And once he's involved, there's no real other option than to get more involved. So, a lot of this support from the sort of, traditional Republican hawk community is more like, hey, President Trump, welcome to the party. Now that you're here, let us tell you about the 7 other things that we want you to do in Syria, most of which he's going to hate and not going to want to do in the end, But he's already paid the price with the people in the alt-right, right? They're not going to forgive him very quickly for, betraying everything he ever said about Syria and intervention in the Middle East for his entire life, right? That's a sunk cost. So as Donald Trump goes forward, politically he can think, okay, should I, capitalize on my new friends? Or, should I sort of play the middle and try to make everybody equally happy or unhappy? None of that has anything to do with what's good for Syria. And, again, there's no way to please both sides. Either you think the best thing is we should just not touch that problem and let them sort it out, and it's not in America's core interest, or you think it's something that we have to do because it impacts Europe, the region, America, terrorism, refugees. And if you think that, then this missile strike is not much. It's not enough. It's just the beginning.
Sarah, a top administration official, when briefing senators yesterday on this, said essentially the policy is reaction, military reaction when chemical weapons are used. But to Josh's point, there are a lot of these quote-unquote new friends, some previous critics of Donald Trump's, like John McCain. They don't want to see just a response to chemical weapons attacks. They want to see a response to barrel bomb attacks and other attacks on Syrians.
Right, and the only thing we know about Trump's approach to Syria is that the administration is not interested in regime change. They're not interested in taking out President Assad. They don't want to have to deal with the aftermath of putting together a new government in Syria. And that's really the only thing we know. That's what the administration has been telegraphing for several weeks now. And that is not aligned with McCain or Graham or even some of these Democratic critics who are praising Trump for this missile strike. There is a lot of interest in Washington in taking out Assad. That was the Obama administration's stated policy. So when Trump came out and said that the Trump administration was not interested in doing so, it was a departure that surprised a lot of people. But escalating involvement in Syria beyond missile strikes that are reactionary to specific violations of the chemical agreement with Russia, that would open the door to potentially whether we're going to go the full measure and take Assad out or whether we're just going to try to weaken him. And so that's when escalation becomes an even thornier question.
All right. Great conversation, you guys. Sarah Westwood, Josh Rogin, thank you so much to both of you. Victor?
Thank you.
So the U.S. launched this strategic blow to the Syrian regime after that chemical attack. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, is confirming the U.S. is prepared to do more. So what's on the table? Good morning. I'm Victor Blackwell, live from New York.
And I'm Brianna Keeler in Washington for Christy Paul.
The Pentagon is trying to solve or get an answer to a question many world leaders are asking. Was Russia involved in some way in the chemical attack on Syria? The Pentagon is examining whether a Russian warplane bombed a hospital 5 hours after the chemical attack, aiming to destroy evidence. And the chemical attack Tuesday killed, we know now, at least 80 people, injured dozens more. And the images, you see them here, of the children and their grieving families prompted President Trump to launch a missile strike on Syrian air base there. And U.S. lawmakers believe Russia may have played a role in that attack.
The Russians are complicit in these war crimes. If they were at that facility and they had personnel stationed at that air base, they had to have known that there was sarin gas being loaded onto those planes.
New photos show the extensive damage that was left behind after President Trump authorized the launch of 59 U.S. missiles to hit a Syrian airfield. And here's what you can see, what's left there of 3 aircraft hangars. 1 is destroyed, 2 others are damaged. And in these pictures, what is left of 5 workshops near where the base stores ammunition. CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson is in London. And Nick, the world watched as the U.S. dealt this blow to the Syrian regime. But what is the path ahead, and what is the expectation, considering we're now into the 7th year of this civil war?
You know, there's a belief that the United States, that Donald Trump took the right decision to have this strike. That's certainly the view in Britain and France and Germany and Italy, to name just a few of United States allies in Europe. But at the same time, there's still concern. I mean, President Trump, just a week ago, you had the French questioning what his policy on Syria was, what his policy on Assad was. It seemed they felt that he was ready to leave him in power. So there's a real concern that while Trump praises himself for his flexibility, the allies are still sort of contorting themselves at the moment to try to figure out what's he going to do next, what's the next move. Certainly what you're hearing from the Europeans, you're hearing it coming from the Middle East, whether it's Egypt. We know President Trump just met with President Sisi of Egypt not so long ago, within the past week. We've heard it from the Jordanians, and also the, some of the sort of more moderate secular opposition in Syria. These are people who also deal with Russia because they believe that Russia is a path to the future political stability inside Syria. So what you're hearing from the Europeans, from the Middle East, from some of these Syrian moderate groups, is they now want to see the administration of the White House get engaged politically in Syria to begin to sort of ramp up their involvement in the Geneva peace process. That's the one that the UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which said that there should be a transition from power from President Assad. They want to see the White House get behind that, but they're concerned because they feel that Trump is mercurial, and they don't have, at the moment, a high degree of certainty of where he's going next on this.
The U.S., Nick, is saying that Russia is complicit in this chemical weapons attack. From a more global perspective, how are countries, including American allies, now viewing Russia after this?
You know, I think there will be a certain element of satisfaction or relief, if you will, to a degree, because, again, the concerns run deep about where the White House goes moving forward. But if you remember when President Trump came to office, you had the British Prime Minister Theresa May, when she was in Washington in late January, saying, yes, by all means, deal with Putin, but check and verify. This is a man not to be trusted, and this has been the view from the European allies. So when they hear Nikki Haley at the UN essentially dismissing the anger that's being portrayed by the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, and overall, President Trump, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, essentially dismissing Russia's claims that this gas attack hasn't been properly investigated. Syria couldn't possibly be involved in it, just to completely negate that and wash that away with these airstrikes, which says, we're not listening to you, essentially, you're wrong, you're lying. That is giving a certain amount of relief to the allies in Europe, who were very concerned about where Trump was going over relations with Putin, and therefore the strong European resolve over Russia's actions, annexing Crimea, getting involved in Ukraine, the worries about what they see that it's doing inside Syria. After all, Europe is being overrun, washed across by the refugees coming out of Syria. So they are relieved in part. But again, we have to come back to that point. What happens next? Everyone's saying it, and that's a view from here as well.
Nick Robertson in London, thank you so much. Victor?
All right, now to this Russian warship that's on the move to a Russian naval base in Syria. A military source tells Russian state news the ship is armed with cruise missiles, and it's entering the same waters where U.S. ships launched that volley of Tomahawk missiles at a Syrian air base. Is it a Russian show of strength or a sign of something worse? All right, let's talk now with Jack Barsky. He's a former KGB spy and author of the book Deep Undercover. Jack, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So let's start here with the Admiral Grigorovich that's moving into the Mediterranean. We know that the cruise missiles are on board. We know that Russian forces are helping to beef up the Syrian air resources. What do you make of this? Is this just a show of force, or from your perspective, does this suggest that something else is coming?
Of course it's a show of force. Syria has been an ally since I can remember, and I was in my late teens and early 20s, has been an ally of the Soviet Union. It was one of the good guys, so to speak. And Assad's, that was Assad's father. And now, you know, Putin is strongly allied with the son. So the concern really is that we're not facing just Syria, and we're not dealing with just the Middle East, but we're not sitting across the table with what is currently our main adversaries, which is Russia, but sort of getting close to being across a firing line, and that I'm deeply concerned with.
I understand you told one of my producers that through Russians' eyes, this strike appears to be emotional. Talk about that, if you would.
Well, again, I just heard a few commentators say the same thing. It's because Donald Trump, during the campaign, pretty much gave a completely different view of the world. And I'm still trying to figure out what is going to be the Trump doctrine. And he's sort of changed on a dime, and he said this himself, he was emotionally impacted by what he saw. That's not how we do policy. That is not how we, you know, deal with the world as a whole. I'm concerned with that as well.
Yeah, and as we look ahead to this meeting, we know that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is headed to Moscow next week, and the meeting will be, I believe, on Wednesday. It's difficult for us to, because of some inconsistencies and contradictions, determine how the U.S. will approach this meeting. But from your perspective, how do you expect that the Kremlin will approach this meeting with Secretary Tillerson?
I think the Kremlin is going to continue to probe. Is there some consistency to our policy? Is there really a line in the sand that they can't cross? Ultimately, they're not suicidal. You know, neither were the Soviet leaders in the past. They want to survive, but they also want to win the game. So we need to have a very consistent approach that isn't just short-term, but long-term. And I'm hoping that Mr. Tillerson is going to, you know, pursue that kind of line of thinking.
So when you say that there is some, that they want to win the game and they're not suicidal, you believe there is some diplomatic option on the table, that there is some room for some deal making?
There should be, and I can only remember, and this is pretty much still very strong in my memory, when Ronald Reagan stepped on the scene, the Soviet leaders, and that trickled down through the ranks of the KGB, were scared out of their mind, and they really respected Ronald Reagan's a strong approach to the relationship with the Soviet Union. But that did not preclude sitting down and having a conversation as adversaries rather than enemies.
Yeah. Very quickly before we go, I want you to listen to Senator Marco Rubio and what he said about Russia and this chemical attack. Let's watch.
The Russians are complicit in these war crimes. If they were at that facility and they had personnel stationed at that air base, they had to have known that there was sarin gas being loaded onto those planes.
With your knowledge of Putin, do you think that's plausible, that the Russians knew that this was going to happen or was potentially possible?
It's possible, but if the Russians, if they were complicit, it was with a wink and a nod. And it was with having the ability to use plausible deniability. What the senator there said is speculation, and I wish we should get off of the speculation and deal with facts. I don't think the facts will ever come out on this one.
All right, Jack Barsky, thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Brianna?
When President Trump ordered airstrikes on Syria, he joined a list of presidents that have used them to send a warning or punish an enemy. Ahead, we'll look at what some of those major missile attacks accomplished. The political fallout remains uncertain this morning after 2 U.S. warships launched a total of 59 Tomahawk missiles into Syria. And we're told that those airstrikes were just one of the options that President Trump considered from his military advisors. And with that decision, he joined a long list of commanders-in-chief who've used missile attacks to punish another country or send a message. Gary Tuchman has a look.
5 years before the 2003 war against a U.S.-led coalition, Saddam Hussein's Iraq was punished by bombing and Tomahawk missile strikes. Whoa. A punitive 4-day campaign ordered by President Bill Clinton following Iraq's refusal to comply with UN Security Council resolutions. Much of Iraq's military infrastructure destroyed. Iraq said hundreds of its troops and civilians were killed. It wasn't the first strike designed to punish the Iraqi regime. In 1993, 2 years after the first Gulf War, 23 cruise missiles were launched into downtown Baghdad, a warning after an assassination plot was uncovered in Kuwait on former President George H.W. Bush, who was visiting the country he helped liberate during the 1991 Gulf War. Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time.
Should Mr. Hussein even dream of retaliating, we have more than enough force in the region to deal with it.
The missiles hit a building believed to have housed Iraq's intelligence service. Punitive attacks have also been used in retaliation for murders of Americans. In 1986, Libyan strongman Muammar Gaddafi was said to be behind the bombing of a disco in West Berlin. 2 U.S. servicemen were killed. The U.S. military reply? 60 tons of munitions raining down on Gaddafi's compound in Tripoli.
My fellow Americans, at 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities.
And the result?
Back there is the building where his wife and children were staying when the bombing came on Monday night. 2 of them were injured. The smallest child, an adopted daughter, was killed.
Today, we have done what we had to do. If necessary, we shall do it again.
Gaddafi survived. He wasn't at the site. Dozens of Libyans died, as did 2 U.S. Air Force pilots. Another punishment for the murder of civilians came in 1998. Operation Infinite Reach led to strikes against al-Qaeda targets in Sudan and Afghanistan, after the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania were bombed. More than 200 people were killed, up to 4,000 wounded. These punitive strikes have been used by a long line of U.S. presidents to punish or to warn others when their actions are deemed a threat to American interests.
I said that we would act with others if possible, and alone if necessary, to ensure that terrorists have no sanctuary anywhere. Tonight, we have.
Gary Tuchman, CNN, Atlanta.
President Trump says he has an outstanding relationship with the Chinese president, but you'll remember just months ago he accused China of raping the United States. Well, can the 2 countries play nice now, or are we headed for a showdown?
TGI Fridays Endless apps are back for good. With every endless round, you can choose any endless app, including new loaded skins, meatballs, and yeah, even new fried pickles. Always endless apps, $10. Always Friday.
Billy Goat Ruffians. Seen it, covered it. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two.
We are farmers. Bum, 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 bum.
Alarm systems tell us after a break-in has occurred. So I thought, what if you could prevent burglaries before they happen? My invention, the Ring Video Doorbell, does that.
Hello?
I'm doing free tree trimming estimates.
I'm dating the children right now.
With Ring, you're always home. Ring lets you see and speak with whoever's at your home from anywhere. And with dual power options, you can install Ring in just minutes. Available at ring.com and these fine retailers.
The best suit you'll ever own is the one you design yourself. One that fits you perfectly. With personalized details, the finest Italian fabrics, and it's made right here in America.
Custom suits by Joseph Abboud, exclusively at Men's Warehouse.
Don't pay more at a big box store. Lumber Liquidators has the hottest flooring styles for less, like our best-selling pre-finished hardwood. It's up to 29% less, and bamboo up to 44% less. Get more from 59 cents and special financing. Get to Lumber Liquidators by Tuesday.
It's another pure gray morning, don't know what the day is holding, and I get up right home and I walk right into the path of a lightning bolt.
Hey, what's this?
It's a laxative. Sometimes I get constipated.
Really?
I like Senokot. It uses a natural vegetable laxative ingredient. That matters to me. And it usually works overnight.
Senokot, because ingredients matter.
I realize that $100,000 is not exactly a fortune.
103.
How long did it take you two to save that?
Oh, a long time.
Long time. Then it's a fortune.
I told you we had a fortune.
Get closer to your investment goals with a conversation.
Heath Ledger's death was shocking.
Why did no one call 911 immediately?
To the last weeks, days, hours of his life revealed clues to his death.
That was the beginning of a deep, dark spiral.
What was really going on in that apartment?
We all heard that and thought, what?
If you weren't interested in the story before, now you are.
Hill Harper, How It Really Happened. Friday at 9 on HLN.
The songs, the sound, the story. Motown the Musical. April 11th through the 16th at the Schuster Center. Tickets on sale now at TicketCenterStage.com.
It would be a tragedy if a stroke victim died from a traffic jam. If a heart attack sufferer died from a lane closure. If a woman who's bleeding internally died from road work. That's why when a person needs emergency care, we have the ability to rush him to the hospital in the ultimate off-road vehicle. Premier Health. Response time you can bet your life on.
The songs, the sound, the story. Motown the Musical. April 11th through the 16th at the Schuster Center. Tickets on sale now at TicketCenterStage.com.
Finding Jesus. New episode tomorrow at 9 on CNN.
Well, after the two-day summit in Florida, President Trump has really nothing but good things to say about the president of China. Watch.
I think truly progress has been made. We'll be making a lot of additional progress. The relationship developed by President Xi and myself, I think, is outstanding. We look forward to being together many times in the future. And I believe lots of very potentially bad problems will be going away.
Now, you'll remember it was not really that long ago when the president was trashing China on the campaign trail, accusing the country of robbing and abusing the United States. Well, our next guest says those comments are a preview of what's to come. He says the relationship between the U.S. and China could be heading for disaster. Gideon Rockman is here with me now. He's the chief foreign affairs columnist for the Financial Times and author of the new book, Easternization: Asia's Rise and America's Decline from Obama to Trump and Beyond. Gideon, good to have you this morning.
Good to be here.
Now, for people who may not remember, and every day seems like a year, so let's play a reminder here of what we heard from then candidate Trump about China. Let's watch.
We are going to label China a currency manipulator. We're like the piggy bank that's being robbed. China's taking our jobs, our money, our base, our manufacturing. The greatest abuser in the history of this country. It's one of the greatest thefts in the history of the world, what they've taken out of our country. We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. Listen, you mother, we're going to tax you 25%.
What do you make, what's your theory on that transition? And yeah, I forgot about that last one myself. From what we heard from then private citizen Trump, candidate Trump, and now President Trump when she comes to town.
Well, the Chinese are incredibly relieved by how this meeting went, if you look at the Chinese official media, because they were expecting, even a week ago, Trump was saying this is going to be a very difficult meeting over trade in North Korea. In fact, he's now saying it was a marvelous meeting, and yet it doesn't seem like the Chinese have really given very much. They've said there'll be a dialogue on these economic issues. That's the kind of thing they had with Obama. So the question is, we've seen over Syria, for example, that Trump is capable of flipping in 24 hours a very long-standing position.
Yeah.
In Syria to a much more aggressive thing. On China, we don't really know whether this is a long-standing change or whether he's going to go back to the more aggressive rhetoric. But for the moment, it went surprisingly well.
And you write that this America First strategy from President Trump is really going to, from your perspective, lead to the decline of the U.S. as it compares to and competes with Asia, namely China.
Well, it depends how it goes, but I think one of the big risky things that Trump has done is pull America out of a Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Which is a win for China.
Yeah, absolutely. The Chinese were delighted by that because that was a new trade agreement, and one can understand, given Trump's protectionist rhetoric on the campaign trail, he had to do it, and he did do it on day one. But for the Chinese, it leaves a big gap in the Asian markets. America's kind of pulling out a bit, and they're trying to build a new free trade area around China. And in fact, I think one of the most interesting developments in Asia is that all of America's security allies now have their most important economic relationship with China, their biggest trading relationship. So that's really changing the balance of power in the region.
You know, what's interesting is that these two men have a lot in common. President Trump's 2016 Make America Great Again was Xi's a few years before his Great Rejuvenation for China, a nationalist tone that they share.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that the underlying danger in the Trump-Xi years, as we're going to get used to calling them, is that these are both nationalist leaders who've both got very similar ideas about make their country great again, and who to some extent see the other country as the obstacle. So Trump on trade, we saw all those clips how he's talked about China raping America. And even on security issues, Rex Tillerson said that the U.S. was going to block China's access to these artificial islands they're building in the South China Sea. Yeah. But from the Chinese side, there's no way they can back down on that issue because Xi's whole rhetoric is about China's standing proud again, China's never going to be humiliated by the West again. So I think there is an underlying tension which even a relatively friendly meeting like this is not going to remove.
Before we let you go, let's talk about the news of the day. I mean, we know that while the presidents were having dinner there, the strikes there were happening on that Syrian airfield. What do you think President Xi gleaned from President Trump's decision to strike Syria in the context of the president saying that if China doesn't take care of North Korea, we will. This now is not just bluster, I guess.
Absolutely. Look, I think the Chinese, like everybody, will be concerned by the potential unpredictability of Trump. And I think the Americans will be pleased that, in a sense, the military option's been put back on the table, because it's useful to have your adversaries slightly worried about that. That said, I think both sides know that North Korea is a very different case. I mean, sending some cruise missiles onto an airfield in Syria is one thing. Trying to take out the North Korean nuclear program is a completely different idea, because the North Koreans would launch devastating strikes, conventional strikes against South Korea. And I'm sure Xi tried to make that point to Trump, that this is not an easy thing to do or a wise thing to do.
All right, Gideon Rockman, good to have you.
Thanks.
All right, Brianna.
Thanks, Victor. At the top of the hour, with the Pentagon looking into whether Moscow was involved in the Syrian chemical weapons attack, why U.S. airstrikes in Syria might just be the first step.
Kinda.
Walk and talk therapy is exactly what it sounds like. Rather than being enclosed in an office space, the therapy session takes place outside while we walk. I mean, you know, this is how I should be approaching it. Yet I'm shutting that out right now. For some clients, coming to therapy in an office setting is intimidating. Walking side by side, clients are a little more free to express themselves.
It makes me just open up a little differently. It makes the conversation seem more natural.
I maintain their confidentiality. If we're a little too close to others, we'll stop for a minute and let people pass.
I'm an outdoors guy by nature. I like to garden and I like being active. And so this is just a natural fit for me. The park itself is really part of the therapy process. When I had therapy in the past and you go into an office, it just feels sterile.
When we're out walking, we're moving forward. And it's the exact same thing we're doing in the therapeutic process. We're moving forward.
The U.S. military is investigating whether Russia was complicit in the Syrian regime's gruesome chemical weapons attack on civilians.
The United States took a very measured step. We are prepared to do more.
I wish that we would obey the Constitution and do this the way our founding fathers intended.
It was the right move. It was legal.
The
president at his Mar-a-Lago resort. He has his whole command center with him. They're watching the reaction here in Syria.
There are tensions within the White House, just as there are tensions within President Trump himself.
All the focus is also on Russia. The Secretary of State will be going there next week. That's where this goes next.
Top of the hour now. Good Saturday morning to you. I'm Victor Blackwell in New York.
And I'm Brianna Keeler in Washington for Christy Paul.
President Trump's strike against Syria may just be the first act, potentially. The United States is delivering a new warning for Syria and keeping a suspicious eye on Russia this morning. The Pentagon is investigating whether Moscow was involved in that chemical attack that killed dozens of people, including children. The Kremlin is staunchly denying any complicity in the attack or a possible cover-up, but it is ratcheting up the stakes for Secretary of State Rex Tillerson when he travels to Moscow for his first meetings with Russia's foreign minister. That's next week.
And also this morning, Russia flexing its muscles. In an apparent show of force, Russia has deployed a warship armed with cruise missiles to the Mediterranean Sea. This is the same area where American ships launched that volley of Tomahawk missiles into Syria just a few days ago.
This morning, we've got our correspondents and expert analysts tracking the latest on the aftermath from those strikes on Syria.
And I want to begin with CNN Pentagon reporter Ryan Brown. What are officials telling us, Ryan, about this investigation into Russia and perhaps its role in this chemical attack?
Good morning, Brianna. That's right. The military tells us they're looking at a couple of different things. One is that there were Russian troops at this base that was struck by these cruise missiles. Now, these troops were what's called part of an aviation unit. So it begs the question whether they were aware that chemical weapons were being loaded onto Syrian aircraft that carried out that strike. Now, the other thing they're looking at is that they've observed a Russian drone flying over the hospital that was also struck 5 hours after the chemical weapons attack. Some say that that was an effort to cover up the chemical weapons attack. So they're looking at whether or not that drone fed information to kind of provide that secondary strike against the hospital. So these are some of the things they're looking at to determine whether or not Russia was complicit in that chemical weapons attack.
And there has been a suspension of a hotline that would help the U.S. and Russian forces coordinate when it comes to Syria. The U.S. does have troops that operate in Syria, about 1,000. What can you tell us about this?
Well, that's right. The Russians announced their intention to suspend what's called this deconfliction channel, and that was established because both the U.S. and Russia launch airstrikes in Syria. The U.S. targets ISIS, Russia targets opposition groups, as well as some strikes against ISIS. So they wanted to make sure to avoid any aerial encounters. Now, the military is telling us that its troops in Syria that are fighting ISIS, they're taking extra precautionary steps to ensure that they're protected, that there's no retaliation against them. Now, they're using surveillance to kind of monitor the situation. They're not exactly saying what other steps they're taking, but these troops, about 1,000 of them in Syria, are being watched more closely to make sure that they're protected.
All right, Ryan Brown covering the Pentagon for us. Thank you so much. Victor?
Let's bring in our panel. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona, CNN military analyst and former U.S. military attaché in Syria. April Ryan, CNN political analyst and White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks. Ivan Eland, senior fellow at the Independent Institute. And Maria Cardona, CNN political commentator and Democratic strategist. Good morning to all. And Colonel, I want to start with you and this investigation at the Pentagon into potentially if Russia was involved or attempted to cover up this chemical attack. Is there any plausible explanation for that Russian drone being over the hospital where some of the victims were being treated hours after the chemical attack beyond some involvement or attempt to cover this up with the information that we know that soon after the drone was there was a bomb that was dropped onto that hospital?
Yeah, if you were a conspiracy theorist, you'd say one led to the other. I'm not sure that's exactly the case. The Russians fly drones all the time. It's part of their targeting process. They also feed that information to the Syrian Air Force. The Syrian Air Force strikes some targets. The Russian Air Force strikes some targets. So we really don't know. It does, make the case that maybe they were aware. But just a Russian drone over a particular target. What is alarming, though, that the drone was over a hospital at all. We have seen the systematic destruction of almost every medical facility in the rebel-controlled areas. They did it in Aleppo during the battle there. Now, as the fighting shifts to Idlib, we're seeing it concentrated in that area as well. So, you know, this is really something we need to look at, not just this one particular incident, but this systemic operations of the Russians and the Syrians against medical facilities.
April, we've seen and heard the criticisms coming from some of the president's most staunch supporters. We've seen the tweets coming from Ann Coulter's, others as well, questioning his decision to get involved here. If this is just a one-off, does that fade, or does this damage the president with some of those supporters who liked what some would call that isolationist stand, not being the policeman of the world?
Well, the president said, you know, when he was running for president, he did not want to be the president of the world. But, you know, as the president of the United States, you are the leader of the free world, and there is a moral authority. And you have to remember, he talked about just last week what President Obama did not do when President Obama was president, when President Obama set the red line around Syria. So this president acted on it. When President Obama was president, he looked for congressional support. He did not receive it, so he did not go in 2013. But this president did it without without congressional support. So it's a mixed bag with his supporters. Some are saying he looks very presidential at this moment. Others are concerned with the issue of the lack of congressional support. But at the same time, you have to remember this. If this is a statement, just a statement to say we are watching is one thing. But if he goes even further to make efforts to remove Bashar al-Assad, that is a big issue for the world community, and that could actually spur Russia to say we're at war with the United States, because they do not want us to go to war and take Bashar al-Assad out of power.
But Ivan, there seems to be no consistency there. Before the chemical attack, we heard from Secretary Tillerson and Ambassador Haley that the U.S. essentially is okay with Assad there. After the attack, the Secretary said that there were efforts underway to remove him. Just last night, the White House would not say whether or not they want Assad to be removed from power, and that makes it quite difficult to walk into the meeting with the foreign minister next week when no one really knows where the U.S. stands on Assad.
Yeah, I think the policy is a muddle right now, and that's unfortunate because if you're trying to send a signal, which this obviously was, they didn't do that much damage, and they even warned the Syrians and the Russians that were coming. If you're trying to send a message, you're not being very effective because, excuse me, your message is muddled. And I think also this attack probably undermines the primary goal of the U.S., which Trump has said, and that is to fight ISIS. We're trying to fight ISIS, and if we now have to watch out for Russian air defenses because we're not observing this agreement anymore, doesn't that at least make us more tenuous in our efforts to get rid of ISIS?
Maria, this week is ending, politically at least, a little better for President Trump than it started. It started with so many questions about the Russia investigations. You had Chairman Nunes step aside. Questions still there. I mean, those are not gone. But it ended with these compliments and the praise from some of his political foes, including Democrats, for this strike in Syria. How do you rate the week for the president?
Well, I think you're right about that. And I think, frankly, that is one of the reasons why the president took this action. And that might sound cynical, but, you know, given his history of trying to muddy the waters with distractions and obfuscations, this is probably the biggest distraction that there is out there. And like you said, we're not really talking about his purported Russian connections during the election. But also, like you said, that is not going away. And ironically, the situation that he is in now, and I think, you know, the bottom line here is that, yes, he took action last night and he's getting a lot of praise. But what does it mean now? Does it mean that, you know, his focus has now changed and he does want to take Assad out? I think that right now, his foreign policy is still incoherent. It lacks a broader strategy. It is clearly still based on gut instinct, based on television images, and based on whoever is the last person who has whispered in his ear. Well, that is not a way to run a country. And yes, you know, the actions have been praised, but ironically, they've also been praised by a lot of Republicans who did not want to give President Obama support, to April's point, back in 2013, to do exactly the same thing that Trump did in the last couple of days.
All right, let's take a quick break. Everyone stay with us. We've got a lot more to talk about. We'll talk about it on the other side of the break. Brianna, now to you in Washington.
Thanks, Victor. The attack in Stockholm could have been so much worse. That is what investigators are saying as they comb through the evidence. We are live to Sweden for an update on that next. Plus, Syrian refugees say they are horrified after this week's chemical attack, and now they are demanding more U.S. action to keep their relatives left behind out of danger. We are joined by Syrian sisters with a cause coming up.
All right, for more now on the analysis on the Syrian missile strike and what happens next, let's bring back our panel. And April, I want to start with you, and I want you to listen to an excerpt from President Trump's 2000 book, The America We Deserve. And let's put it up on the screen here. He wrote then that my rules of engagement are pretty simple. If we're going to intervene in a conflict, it had better pose a direct threat to our interest. One definition of direct being a threat so obvious that most Americans will know where the hot spot is on the globe and will quickly understand why we are getting involved. The threat should be so direct that our leaders, including our president, should be able to make the case clearly and concisely. He goes on to write, at the same time, we must not get involved in a long festering conflict for humanitarian reasons. Does this appear to reach then Citizen Trump's threshold for rules of engagement?
Citizen Trump and President Trump are two different people now, and we're clearly seeing that just with the shakeup in the National Security Council this week. The stakes are so high. And over the years, we've come to find out that when you have dictatorships or countries that are rogue states or what have you, and then you have issues of terrorism breeding out of those countries, it is something that directly affects us. So there is a link to the United States and Syria. You have ISIS that is growing there, that's attacking people there, and then you also have a leader, Bashar al-Assad, who is allowing his forces to poison its people with sarin gas and chlorine and things of that nature. So there is a direct impact when you say a place like Syria has this happening, because if you continue to allow these situations to happen, it just breeds terror. It breeds so many things that the tentacles can come to our country. Yeah. So he's learning this as president. And it's interesting, Victor, also there is a tweet from 2012 going back to Donald Trump's comments about then President Obama. He said something about his poll numbers at the time, you know, and wanting to bomb another country. And he said it's deplorable and despicable. And people are retweeting that. So Citizen Trump versus President Trump, they're two totally different things.
Very different realities.
Yes, I think he's redefining his foreign policy posture.
That's exactly what Maria was getting to. But let me pick up what April was saying, and Ivan, bring it to you. If we now, or the United States I should say, has created this precedent, the president has created this precedent that he will get involved if it's at the level of chemical weapons, does the United States now go back to not being involved after 400,000 people, almost all of them have died from some other weapon, barrel bombs and the rest? Do we stay out of that fight after we've now created this precedent that we will get involved militarily in Syria?
Well, that's the problem when you intervene in countries, no matter how limited it is. You sort of buy into what happens next if you don't deter Assad or any other leader from doing what you didn't want them to do. And so what do we do next? And I hope they have a plan down the road. And it may not be. This happened pretty quickly, and I'm not sure. That's one of my problems with this, is that it doesn't fit into a strategic vision that has been enunciated after he's been president. You just read his version when he was a citizen, and I happen to like that version. I think we should only use military power when we really need to and in the national interest. And there's no strategic interest in Syria. Otto von Bismarck would come back and say, if your enemies are fighting ISIS, Al-Qaeda versus the regime, who's obviously despicable, let them fight, right? And so we really have no strategic thinking. And I think Trump, as a citizen, had really nailed it. But he's not following that as president so far.
Let me jump in here. Colonel, quickly to you. We now know that Syria has chemical weapons. I mean, the 2013, 2014 diplomacy to have Russia destroy them didn't work. What will be the effort, or what should be the effort, to find and destroy them now?
I'm not sure we're ever going to find and destroy them all. You know, I lived in Syria for quite a while. I spent a lot of time trying to track down these very things. There's a lot of places to hide these kind of weapons. It's a very difficult country to get a handle on, very secretive. So we may never know. The question is not whether they have them, it's whether they're going to use them. A lot of countries have weapons that we would rather they didn't, as long as they're deterred from using them. So the point is, we've told the Syrians, and now we've demonstrated to the Syrians, that the use of chemical weapons is unacceptable, and we will react if they do so. But I do take the point mentioned earlier that 400,000 Syrians have died via other means. So it almost seems like we're giving people a license to kill using conventional weapons, but cross that line and use a chemical weapon, then the United States will be spurred into action.
All right, we've got to wrap it there. Maria, you get the first question on the next one. Thank you, everybody, for being with us.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Breaking news out of Sweden this morning, where a deadly attack in the nation's capital could have been so much worse. Local media reports that a bomb was found in the truck used in yesterday's attack, but it didn't properly detonate. CNN international correspondent Max Foster is joining us live now from Stockholm. This is so alarming, Max, but certainly this is in what has been a horrible story. It obviously could have also been so much worse.
Yeah, we're hearing that there was some sort of device, some sort of technical device in the vehicle. They're investigating that, and that's been interpreted by some as a bomb, but we haven't got that official notification from the police. They say they are holding a 31-year-old suspect. He was an Uzbek national. He had been living here in Sweden, and he was known to the police, and so they accepted that there are parallels here with the attack that happened in Parliament in London as well recently, where again someone carried out a similar style of attack with a vehicle and was known to the police. Same in Berlin, same in Nice as well. It does fit into this pattern, and it's a frightening pattern as well across Europe, where people can just take a vehicle and drive into a crowd in one of the most busy places in Europe, really. If you look down the street, this is where the vehicle would have been thundering down, would have been full of people. It's a pedestrianised area. You may just be able to make out through the flowers as well, where it drove literally into a department store and came to a halt. Luckily, as you say, it didn't explode. Brianna.
All right, Max Foster, and we are getting some new pictures in there that we were just showing you moments ago from Stockholm, Sweden. Thank you so much, Max, for that report. Victor?
All right, the crisis in Syria raising fears for refugees who managed to escape. Next, we speak to two Syrian sisters who are blasting the chemical attack as torturous, demanding more action from the U.S. and from the global community. Welcome back. I'm Victor Blackwell in New York.
And I'm Brianna Keeler in Washington for Christy Paul. A damning allegation: was Russia involved in the chemical attack on Syria? A U.S. military official tells CNN the Pentagon is examining whether a Russian warplane bombed a hospital 5 hours after the chemical attack, aiming to destroy evidence. The chemical attack Tuesday killed at least 80 people. It injured dozens more. And these images that you're seeing of the aftermath prompted President Trump to act. Russian President Vladimir Putin blasting the decision to strike the Assad regime as a, quote, act of aggression, saying that the move dealt a serious blow to Russian-U.S. relations. This coming after Putin initially denied a chemical attack even happened in Syria. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley says the U.S. is prepared to do more, and Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, who serves on the Armed Services Committee, says Russia used the attack to test the United States.
I think there's mounting evidence that they were complicit in one way or another, that they knew about it. Russians at some level knew about it, and they should be held accountable. Russia is testing us around the world through the violation of the INF Treaty involving cruise missiles, other steps that have been taken and are ongoing.
Well, Syrian refugees here in the U.S. say they're horrified. They fear for the lives of the lives, at least, of the relatives left behind in the war-torn country. CNN's Rachel Crane is with us now, and you're speaking with some of the people here in the U.S. who have family members still in Syria. What are they telling you?
Well, Victor, it's really a mixed bag of reactions to this airstrike. Many are frustrated that intervention didn't happen sooner, that this crisis has been going on for years. Some people pointing out that Donald Trump has very distinctly flip-flopped on his stand on Syria, so that they think that this airstrike is just simply a political move. But many, as you pointed out, who have families still in Syria are grateful that any action has taken place at all. Take a listen to what a few of them had to say.
It's about time, I mean, to get rid of this tyrant, this evil tyrant, I mean, and stop him and stop those who are supporting him. I mean, we've been, Syrian people have been crying, begging for such action.
I'm happy, yes. I'm happy. That's that, because, you know, we've been suffering for 5 years. Nobody can take any action. People dying, crying, everywhere in Syria. Which president in the world do that? Nobody do it. Nobody do it. But I hope it continue. That's what I'm hoping. Not only for days, but science is good.
Person would welcome war or destruction or bombing to their country, to their homeland, to anywhere. No sane person would welcome that, but the fact that Syrians are happy about this airstrike just speaks to the desperation of the situation for the last 6 years.
Now, Victor, I also spoke to one Syrian restaurant owner here in the States, and he pointed out, he said that it's ironic that Trump wants to do this strike and, on the other hand, block Syrian refugees from coming into this country. He also went on to underscore how he believes that this is a political move. He said that Donald Trump is killing the chicken to scare the cow, in this instance, the cow being North Korea. But as I pointed out, a lot of mixed emotions here, but from the Syrians that we've spoken to, many are simply grateful that any action has taken place.
Yeah, there is this optimism after this airstrike, or this strike rather, but I wonder if now that we know that this is linked specifically to a chemical attack, and it will not be linked to any other type of conventional bombing, is that optimism going to last?
Well, that's the question here, but as I pointed out, many are still clinging to that optimism that they have right now, hoping that it continues, but of course that's the big question mark right now.
Yeah, what will the strategy be moving forward? Rachel Crane, thanks so much. Brianna?
Thanks, Victor. My next guests are Syrian sisters who say the chemical attack was a torturous way to kill, and they are doing what they can to help out friends and family left behind. Now, they are praising the administration for launching these strikes against the regime. I'd like to welcome Huda and Heba Saib joining me now. And we actually do not have your sister Siba with us. You are two of triplets. I would like to point that out. But just tell me about your reaction to the chemical attack, what you thought when you saw those pictures, and also what went through your mind when you saw this strike happen on the Syrian base.
So, of course, seeing a chemical attack, it's such a torturous way to kill, and it's a horrific way to act on your own people. And we just want to focus on the children that went through this and are stuck in the middle of this war. So these children, they're stuck in Syria. They're being under threat for their lives. They are being bombed. Now chemical attacks. It just seems like the situation keeps escalating more and more, and they have no other way out, which is why we think the administration and the United States should go further in letting these kids who are stuck in this situation in, because they can't move on with their lives.
Well, and certainly I want to talk to you about that, especially you can speak to that as Syrian refugees. But Huda, I wonder, when you saw that this strike had taken place, were you surprised? What was your reaction?
I was surprised that the airstrike had taken place, because after 6 years, more than 6 years of kind of silence from America, this is a positive step toward leadership and initiative that's happening people.
And what did you think, Heba?
Well, We were completely surprised that something like this has ever happened. For us, any chemical attack on its people, any danger to people is something horrific and something completely no one should ever stand for. As Americans and as the ability that we have as American people to help these Syrian refugees, I think that we have so much resources here, so many resources here that we can use to help Syrian children and further their education, help them, and just save these people.
So you're glad, and if you can speak to something, you're certainly glad to have seen this attack. I know so many people, certainly your family members must have felt like this was a long time coming. But to your point, to your sister's point, how do you square this with President Trump's policy when it comes to refugees, and what do you want to see?
The airstrike and this kind of warning towards the Syrian government, it kind of contradicts with his policy towards the Syrian refugees. You can't sympathize with the Syrian people to the point where you have an airstrike and at the same time keep them in that kind of situation, because you're keeping them locked in and forcing them under these bombs and under the chemical attacks.
Heba, what do you think about that?
I do agree with that. I do think that a part of helping these people, it's not just by using these chemical attacks, but also and striking them is by bringing them in, helping them, bringing them into our country.
You've, Heba, I'm sure, or tell me if you have not, have you or your parents been in touch with your family back home? What are you hearing?
Yes, we are there currently in Damascus, so they're in the safe zone for where they are, but they're all just completely shocked that something like this has happened and are hoping for the best.
Well, we're certainly thinking of you and your family at this time. Thank you so much, Huda and Heba Saeed. We do appreciate you joining us. And if you do want to help the people in Syria, you can go to CNN.com and click on Impact Your World.
President Trump says he has an outstanding relationship with the Chinese president, but just months ago he accused China of raping the United States. Will this camaraderie continue, or are we headed for a showdown? We'll talk about that in a moment, but first, this week's Start Small, Think Big looks at a beekeeping company that produces honey and all sorts of other bee products. Watch.
It really started with putting this helmet on and riding a bike that is painted like a bee. My name is Christy Allen. I am founder and head beekeeper at the Bee's Knees. We sell raw honey, meaning it's never been heated. When you heat honey really hot, you lose a lot of the flavor from the flowers. The Bee's Knees is a small beekeeping business that does honey production, honey delivery by bicycle. We also sell t-shirts, bandanas, candles. The honey house serves hobby beekeepers. We rent out these pedal-powered honey extractors that we designed and built. The Bee's Knees is a success financially because we continue to diversify and grow. We have partnerships where you put the bees. We label it by the zip code and the organization. So they're getting the benefit of the marketing tool. We get the benefit of reaching their communities with our message. Reviving the hive for healthy bees, healthy lives. So all I did here was drill a little hole in between the wood, big enough for a bee to get through. The education program, the Camp Bee's Knees, it's a really good way to build a community of beekeepers and strengthen it. As long as the bees are still around, the business will thrive.